The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalk as Eleanor Jenkins made her way home from Friendly Market, the neighborhood grocery store she'd been visiting every Thursday for the past 12 years. At 78, Eleanor moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had nowhere urgent to be, her weathered hands clutching 2 paper bags filled with essentials for the week ahead. Eleanor was a fixture in the downtown Las Vegas community, recognizable by her cloud-white hair always neatly pinned back, and the vintage floral dresses she preferred regardless of current fashion trends. Today she wore her favorite blue dress with tiny yellow flowers, a gift from her late husband Tom on their 50th anniversary. 7 years ago now. Should have taken the bus, she muttered to herself, shifting the weight of the grocery bags. The arthritis in her knuckles was flaring up again, made worse by the unusual spring chill that had settled over Las Vegas. But Eleanor had always been stubborn about maintaining her independence. The 4-block walk from the grocery store to her modest apartment was a ritual she clung to, a quiet declaration that she wasn't ready for the rocking chair just yet. As she approached the intersection of Palmer Street and Vine Avenue, Eleanor noticed an unusual amount of commotion ahead. Several police cars were parked haphazardly, their lights flashing silently against the storefronts. Yellow caution tape cordoned off a section of the sidewalk across the street. A small crowd of onlookers had gathered at the edges of the scene, their necks craned to catch a glimpse of whatever drama was unfolding. Eleanor paused, considering whether to take a detour down Mason Lane instead, but that would add another 10 minutes to her walk, and the milk would surely warm in this afternoon heat. She adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses with one finger and decided to simply cross to the opposite side of the street, giving whatever police business was happening a wide berth. The pedestrian light turned white, and Eleanor stepped carefully off the curb, mindful of the uneven pavement. The weight of the groceries threw off her balance slightly, causing her to list to one side as she crossed. Halfway across the street, one of the paper bags began to tear along its bottom edge. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Eleanor muttered, quickening her pace as best she could. She made it to the other side just as a can of soup rolled out of the weakened bag, clattering onto the sidewalk and rolling toward the police scene. 2 officers who had been speaking with a shop owner turned at the sound. Eleanor didn't notice them at first, focused as she was on trying to keep the remainder of her groceries from spilling. She set down one bag and bent slowly, reaching for the escaped can. "Ma'am!" "Stop right there!" a sharp voice called out. Eleanor straightened up, confused. She looked around before realizing the officer was addressing her. Her hearing aid battery had been giving her trouble all morning, making the officer's words sound muffled and distant. "I'm sorry," she called back, her voice wavering slightly. The 2 officers were approaching her now with purposeful strides, their faces set in stern expressions. Officer Raymond Bell was a newer addition to the force, just 26 and eager to prove himself. His partner, Officer Diane Wong, had 8 years on the force but had recently transferred from a quiet suburban precinct to this more challenging downtown beat. "Ma'am, you need to step back from the perimeter," Officer Bell said, his hand resting instinctively on his belt. "This is an active crime scene." Eleanor looked down and noticed for the first time the yellow tape just a few feet from where her can had rolled. She'd wandered closer to the police activity than she'd intended. "Oh goodness, I'm sorry. My groceries." She gestured to the torn bag and the soup can on the ground. "I need to see some identification," Officer Wong said, stepping closer. The department had been on high alert all week, following a series of jewelry store robberies in the area. The latest had occurred just an hour earlier at the shop behind them, and the suspects were still at large. Eleanor reached into her purse, her movements slow and deliberate. "I live just over on Maple Street. I'm just trying to get my groceries home before the ice cream melts completely." Officer Bell mistook her rummaging for something suspicious. Recent department briefings about potential diversionary tactics used by the robbery crew had put him on edge. An elderly woman wasn't the typical profile, but he'd been taught that appearances could be deceiving. "Remove your hand from your bag slowly." "Ma'am," he ordered, his voice taking on a harder edge. Eleanor, still struggling to hear clearly, continued searching for her wallet. "Just need to find my ID. Everything ends up at the bottom of this purse. I said remove your hand from the bag." Officer Bell repeated, much louder this time. Startled by the sudden increase in volume, Eleanor jumped slightly, causing her remaining grocery bag to tip over. Oranges and a package of cookies spilled onto the sidewalk, rolling in different directions. One orange rolled beneath the yellow tape. "Oh no," Eleanor exclaimed, instinctively stepping forward to retrieve her scattered groceries. Officer Bell misinterpreted her movement as an attempt to cross into the crime scene. He quickly closed the distance between them and grabbed Eleanor's arm, pulling her back roughly. "Ow!" Eleanor cried out in pain and surprise. Her purse slipped from her shoulder, landing with a thud beside her spilled groceries. By now, several bystanders had noticed the interaction. A young woman in a red jacket pulled out her phone and began recording. An older man carrying a briefcase stopped walking and frowned deeply at the scene unfolding before him. "What are you doing?" "She's just an old lady," someone called from the growing crowd. Officer Wong sensed the situation deteriorating and stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need you to cooperate. There's been a robbery and we need to verify everyone in the area." Eleanor's heart was racing now, a fluttering sensation in her chest that reminded her of the palpitations her doctor had warned her about. "I don't understand what's happening," she said, her voice trembling. "I was just walking home with my groceries." The confusion and fear in her eyes was genuine, but Officer Bell had been trained to look for deception. The recent department-wide briefing about the robbery crew possibly using elderly associates as lookouts or distractions lingered in his mind. "We have reason to believe accomplices to the jewelry store robbery may still be in the area," Officer Bell stated firmly. "Your behavior seems suspicious entering a marked crime scene." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Robbery? I don't know anything about a robbery." The soupcan rolled away, that's all. By now, the crowd of onlookers had grown to about 15 people, many with phones raised. The scene, two uniformed officers confronting a white-haired elderly woman surrounded by spilled groceries, had quickly drawn attention. "Check her ID," Officer Bell said to his partner, maintaining his grip on Eleanor's arm. Officer Wong knelt down and opened Eleanor's fallen purse. "Ma'am, I'm going to look for your identification, okay?" Eleanor nodded, becoming increasingly distressed. The pressure on her arm was painful, aggravating her arthritis. "Please, you're hurting me," she said, trying to pull away slightly. Officer Bell tightened his grip in response. "Stay still, ma'am." "I found it," Officer Wong said, pulling out Eleanor's wallet. She opened it and examined the driver's license inside. Eleanor Jenkins, residence on Maple Street. "Run it," Officer Bell instructed, not releasing his hold. Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes, as much from humiliation as from pain. Several of her neighbors were among the gathering spectators. Mrs. Patterson from the apartment next door was staring open-mouthed from across the street. The familiar cashier from the drugstore was whispering to another bystander. "Please," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I'm 78 years old. I don't know anything about any robbery." Officer Wong stepped away to run the license through the system on their patrol car computer. Eleanor stood trembling, still in Officer Bell's firm grip, watching helplessly as the ice cream melted out of its carton onto the hot sidewalk. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, more indignant. Someone had helped gather some of Eleanor's spilled groceries into a pile, but many items remained scattered. "This is how you treat our elders?" a man shouted from the back of the crowd. "She can barely stand up straight. What is wrong with you people?" called another. Officer Bell's jaw tightened. He was following protocol, but he hadn't anticipated becoming the villain in a viral video today. Still, he couldn't simply release a potential suspect based on public pressure. The robbery was high profile, the third in a series that had the department under scrutiny. Eleanor's legs were beginning to shake from standing in one position too long. Her morning medication was wearing off, and the familiar ache in her knees was returning with a vengeance. "May I please sit down?" she asked, her voice small but dignified even in her distress. Before Officer Bell could respond, Officer Wong returned from the patrol car. "She's clean. No record, not even a parking ticket. Address confirms she lives 4 blocks from here." The tight line of Officer Bell's mouth softened slightly, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Ma'am, do you have any information about the jewelry store robbery that occurred here approximately 1 hour ago?" Eleanor shook her head emphatically. "I was at the grocery store. You can ask Jimmy at the checkout. He always helps me with my bags on Thursdays." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, but protocol dictated thoroughness. Officer Bell was about to ask another question when a commotion at the edge of the crowd caught everyone's attention. A large, powerful figure was making his way through the gathered onlookers, who parted almost instinctively before him. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about his presence, something instantly recognizable. Officer Bell's eyes widened slightly as he realized who was approaching. The unmistakable face of Mike Tyson, former heavyweight champion of the world, was now focused intently on the scene before him, his expression a mixture of concern and determination, as he took in the sight of the elderly woman being held by the police officer. The crowd fell into a stunned hush as Mike Tyson approached the scene. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a fitted black t-shirt that accentuated his still powerful build. Despite being years past his boxing prime, his presence commanded attention, not just because he was a celebrity, but because he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Mike had been having lunch at Rosalinda's, an upscale Italian restaurant just around the corner, when he heard the commotion outside. He'd initially planned to ignore it. Public attention wasn't always welcome in his life these days, but something about the rising voices drew him to the window. What he saw made him immediately ask for his check. "Let her go," Mike said as he approached, his voice surprisingly soft, yet carrying the unmistakable rasp that millions recognized worldwide. "What's going on here?" Officer Bell straightened his posture but didn't release Eleanor's arm. The unexpected appearance of Mike Tyson had caught him completely off guard, adding another complicated layer to an already tense situation. He was suddenly aware that whatever happened next would likely be viewed by thousands, maybe millions online. "Sir, this is police business. I'm going to need you to step back," Officer Bell said, trying to maintain authority despite the surreal turn of events. Eleanor looked up at Mike, her eyes wide with surprise and confusion. In her younger days, she'd watched many of his fights with her husband Tom, who had been a devoted boxing fan. Never in her wildest imagination would she have expected to see him in person, let alone in these circumstances. "My arm," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. "He's hurting me." Mike's eyes narrowed slightly. He stopped a respectful distance away, careful not to escalate the situation, but his gaze was unwavering as he took in Eleanor's distress. "I understand you've got a job to do," Mike said to the officers, his tone measured. "But from where I'm standing, all I see is an elderly lady with groceries on the ground and tears in her eyes." "What exactly is she supposed to have done?" Officer Wong stepped forward, recognizing the need to defuse the situation. "There was a robbery at the jewelry store. We're questioning everyone in the immediate vicinity." Mike glanced at Eleanor, then at the spilled groceries, the melting ice cream forming a puddle on the hot sidewalk. "She's carrying grocery bags. Does she look like a jewelry thief to you?" A few people in the crowd chuckled nervously. Someone called out, "Tell him, Mike." Eleanor's legs were shaking more visibly now. The stress of the situation was taking its toll on her already fragile health. "Please," she said, "I need to sit down. My heart—" At that, Mike's expression hardened. "She needs medical attention," he stated firmly. It wasn't a question or a suggestion, it was a declaration. Officer Wong noticed Eleanor's pallor and the slight tremor in her hands. With a quick, meaningful look at her partner, she said, "Ray, maybe we should let her sit down." Officer Bell hesitated. Department protocol was clear about maintaining control of a situation, but this situation had spiraled far beyond the usual parameters. He was now dealing with a potentially ill elderly woman, an agitated crowd, and a famous boxing champion whose intervention was being recorded by at least a dozen phones. "There's a bench right there," Mike pointed out, gesturing to a nearby bus stop. "At least let her sit while you sort this out." Officer Bell reluctantly loosened his grip on Eleanor's arm. "Fine, but she stays where we can see her." As soon as the officer's grip relaxed, Eleanor's knees buckled slightly. Without hesitation, Mike stepped forward and gently supported her elbow, steadying her. "I got you, ma'am," he said quietly. "Let's get you sitting down." Officer Bell tensed as Mike moved closer, but Officer Wong gave a slight shake of her head. Escalating the situation further would only make things worse. Mike carefully guided Eleanor to the bench, his massive hand barely touching her frail arm. Despite his intimidating size, his movements were surprisingly gentle. Eleanor sank onto the bench with obvious relief, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "Thank you," she whispered to Mike. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to go home. Mike nodded, then turned to face the officers. Look, I don't want any trouble, but this lady needs her medication and some water. She's not going anywhere. Can we make that happen? Officer Wong, sensing an opportunity to de-escalate, nodded. I'll get water from our car. As she walked toward the patrol car, Mike crouched down beside Eleanor, putting himself at her eye level. Despite his imposing frame, there was something almost tender in the way he spoke to her. What's your name, ma'am? Eleanor Jenkins, she replied, her voice steadier now that she was sitting. I live in the Granada Apartments on Maple, Mike nodded. I'm Mike. A ghost of a smile crossed Eleanor's lips. I know who you are, young man. My Tom never missed one of your fights. Something in Mike's expression softened at that. He looked up at Officer Bell, who was standing a few feet away, still watchful. Officer, her purse is on the ground. She probably has medication in there, and her groceries are getting ruined in this heat. Officer Bell hesitated, then picked up Eleanor's purse from the sidewalk and handed it to her, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the increasingly awkward situation. Ma'am, do you have identification that shows your address? Eleanor nodded, her hands still shaking as she opened her purse. Officer Wong already checked my driver's license. It's in my wallet. By now, several bystanders had moved closer, some still recording, others whispering among themselves. A middle-aged woman stepped forward with Eleanor's scattered groceries gathered into the one unbroken bag. Here, she said, setting the bag down near the bench. I saved what I could. But the ice cream was a lost cause. Thank you, dear, Eleanor said, the color slowly returning to her cheeks as she sat in the shade of the bus stop. Officer Wong returned with a bottle of water, which she handed to Eleanor. Drink this slowly, ma'am. Eleanor took the water gratefully. As she drank, Officer Wong pulled her partner aside for a quiet conversation. Mike remained crouched beside Eleanor, his presence both protective and reassuring. She checks out completely, Officer Wong said in a low voice to Officer Bell. Dispatch confirms she has no connection to any known associates of the robbery suspects, and her story about the grocery store is consistent with her purchases. She nodded toward the grocery bag. We need to let this go before it gets any worse. Officer Bell ran a hand over his face, acutely aware of the crowd still watching and recording. His initial suspicion, which had seemed reasonable in the context of the robbery investigation, now felt embarrassingly misplaced. Fine, he said tersely. But we document everything according to protocol. Officer Wong nodded and returned to where Eleanor sat with Mike beside her. Mrs. Jenkins, we apologize for the misunderstanding. You're free to go, but would you like medical assistance? We can call an ambulance if you're not feeling well. Eleanor shook her head. No ambulance. Those bills are frightful. I just need to catch my breath. Mike stood up, towering over the scene. I can make sure she gets home safely, he offered. The statement surprised even him. He'd originally planned to simply help defuse the situation and then continue on his way. But something about Eleanor's dignity in the face of humiliation had struck a chord with him. Officer Bell looked skeptical. Mr. Tyson, I appreciate your concern, but it's fine, Eleanor interrupted, looking up at Mike with newfound confidence. I'd be honored to have Mr. Tyson escort me home. It's not every day a lady my age gets such distinguished company. A ripple of approving murmurs went through the crowd. Someone called out, Classic Iron Mike. Another voice added, looking out for the community. Officer Wong, recognizing a perfect opportunity to end the situation positively, nodded. That would be fine, Mrs. Jenkins. Again, we apologize for the confusion. Mike helped Eleanor to her feet. She was steadier now, the brief rest and water having restored some of her strength. My grocery bag, she said, looking at the lone surviving paper bag. I got it, Mike said, easily lifting the bag that had given Eleanor so much trouble. Is there anything else here that's yours? Eleanor looked at the melted ice cream and damaged items on the sidewalk with a sigh. No, the rest is ruined. And I so wanted that butter pecan ice cream. It was on special this week. Mike smiled, a genuine, warm expression that transformed his often intimidating features. I think we can fix that problem. As they prepared to leave, a few people approached, phones extended for selfies with Mike. He politely but firmly shook his head. Not today, folks. I'm helping this lady get home. The crowd reluctantly backed away, though phones still recorded as Mike and Eleanor began walking slowly down the sidewalk, away from the police scene. Mike adjusted his pace to match Eleanor's careful steps. the grocery bag looking comically small in his powerful hand. Officer Bell and Wong watched them go, both aware that they had narrowly avoided what could have been a public relations disaster. "That was unexpected," Officer Bell said finally. Officer Wong nodded. "Lesson learned. Never judge a book by its cover. That applies to elderly ladies with groceries and to boxing champions, too." As Mike and Eleanor turned the corner, heading toward Maple Street, the crowd finally began to disperse. The video of the incident, however, was already being uploaded to various social media platforms, where it would soon catch fire and spread across the internet. The unlikely pair, the elderly woman and the boxing legend, would become overnight symbols of something the public desperately needed to see: compassion crossing all boundaries of age, background, and circumstance. As Mike and Eleanor walked slowly down the tree-lined sidewalk of Palmer Street, an unusual silence fell between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, just the natural quiet of two strangers processing the unexpected circumstances that had brought them together. The spring sunshine filtered through the leaves overhead, casting dappled patterns on the cracked concrete beneath their feet. "You didn't have to do that back there," Eleanor said finally, her voice steadier now. "But I'm grateful you did." Mike glanced down at her, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes people just need someone to speak up for them. Those officers weren't seeing you, they were seeing a situation, a protocol." Eleanor nodded, her pace deliberate but determined. "I've become invisible in my old age, you know. It happens to all of us eventually. People look right through you as if your time has already passed." Mike chuckled, a deep rumbling sound. "Nobody looks through me, but sometimes they only see what they expect to see. The boxer, the celebrity, not the person." "Sounds like we have something in common then," Eleanor said with a small smile. They turned onto Maple Street, a quieter residential road lined with modest apartment buildings and small houses. The Granada apartment stood about halfway down the block, a 3-story brick building from the 1970s with a faded elegance about it. "That's where I live," Eleanor pointed. "Apartment 2B. Been there 26 years now." As they approached the building, Mike noticed Eleanor was moving more confidently, her initial shock from the police encounter seemingly fading. But he could still see the red marks on her arm where Officer Bell had gripped her. "Those officers had no right to handle you that way," Mike said, his voice low but intense. "No matter what they suspected," Eleanor sighed. "The young one, Officer Bell, he reminded me of my grandson Kevin, so eager to prove himself that he doesn't always think things through." She paused at the front steps of her building. "I'm not angry at him, just disappointed." Mike raised an eyebrow, surprised by her capacity for forgiveness. He wasn't sure he would have been so understanding in her place. Eleanor began to climb the stairs, moving carefully and gripping the handrail. Mike stayed close beside her, ready to offer support if needed, but respecting her independence enough not to assume she required help. "Second floor," she said a bit breathlessly as they reached the lobby. "There's an elevator, but it breaks down more often than it works." "I don't mind stairs," Mike replied simply. They made their way up to the second floor, Eleanor setting the pace. When they reached apartment 2B, she fumbled in her purse for her keys. "Let me hold that," Mike offered, indicating the grocery bag he was still carrying. Eleanor unlocked her door and pushed it open, revealing a small but impeccably neat apartment. The living room was furnished with well-worn but clean furniture, family photos covering nearly every surface. The smell of lavender and something baking, perhaps cinnamon, hung in the air. "Come in, please," Eleanor said, stepping aside. "The least I can do is offer you something to drink after all your help." Mike hesitated briefly. His afternoon schedule included a meeting with charity organizers he was in Las Vegas to support, a youth boxing program for underprivileged kids, but something told him that this unexpected detour mattered, more than he'd initially realized. "I'd like that," he said, ducking slightly as he entered the apartment. Eleanor directed him to place the grocery bag on the small kitchen counter, and then gestured toward a floral-patterned couch. "Please make yourself comfortable. Would you prefer iced tea or coffee? I'm afraid I don't keep anything stronger these days." "Iced tea would be perfect," Mike said, taking a seat that seemed comically small beneath his large frame. As Eleanor busied herself in the tiny kitchen, Mike looked around the living room. Every inch of the space told a story of a life well lived. Black and white photos of a younger Eleanor with a tall, lean man he assumed was her husband. color photographs of children and grandchildren at various ages, a display case with what appeared to be military medals and a folded American flag. Your husband was in the service? Mike called to Eleanor. Tom was Army Korea, Eleanor replied from the kitchen. Passed 7 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry, Mike said simply. Eleanor returned with 2 glasses of iced tea, setting them carefully on coasters on the coffee table. She lowered herself into an armchair across from Mike with a slight wince. Mike noticed immediately. Your arm is hurting you. It's nothing, Eleanor said dismissively. At my age, everything hurts a little. May I? Mike asked, gesturing toward her arm. Eleanor hesitated, then extended her arm toward him. Mike gently pushed up the sleeve of her dress to reveal angry red marks where Officer Bell's fingers had dug into her skin. Mike's expression darkened. This isn't right. Those officers should be held accountable. Eleanor pulled her arm back gently. What good would that do? More conflict, more anger. The world has enough of that already, don't you think? Mike leaned back, studying her face. Most people would want justice. At my age, justice and peace aren't always the same thing, Eleanor said, taking a sip of her tea. I've seen enough in my 78 years to know that sometimes it's better to let things go. A thoughtful silence fell between them as they drank their tea. Outside, the sounds of traffic and city life continued, but in the small apartment, time seemed to slow down. You mentioned earlier that your husband watched my fights, Mike said after a while, genuinely curious. Eleanor smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Oh yes, Tom never missed one. He'd get so excited, jumping up and down in front of the TV. Nearly knocked over his recliner during your match with Holyfield. Mike laughed, a genuine sound that filled the small room. Which one? The first one, I think. 1996. Eleanor's eyes took on a distant look. Tom always believed you'd come back from that loss. He said you had the heart of a true champion. Mike's expression softened. Your husband sounds like he was a good man. The best, Eleanor agreed. He would have been beside himself knowing I met you today. Probably would have asked for an autograph, something I'd never do. She paused, a mischievous glint in her eye. Though I wouldn't say no if you offered. Mike laughed again, surprised by Eleanor's spunk. I'd be honored. Eleanor stood up and crossed to a bookshelf, returning with a small album. Tom kept newspaper clippings of all your big fights. Said someday they'd be worth something, but really he just admired you. She handed Mike the album, which he opened carefully. Inside were yellowed newspaper articles, meticulously cut out and preserved in plastic sleeves. His younger self stared back at him from the pages. Powerful, undefeated, sometimes controversial. This is... Mike paused, genuinely moved. This is really something. As he flipped through the pages, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Checking it quickly, he saw a message from his assistant reminding him about the charity meeting. You need to go, Eleanor observed, noticing the shift in his attention. Mike nodded reluctantly. I have a meeting. Youth boxing program downtown? Eleanor smiled warmly. That sounds wonderful. Giving back to the community. Mike closed the album and handed it back to her. Do you have a pen? I'd like to leave something for your collection. Eleanor's face lit up as she hurried to a drawer and returned with a ballpoint pen. Mike took the album and opened it to the inside cover, thinking for a moment before writing. Meanwhile, Eleanor went to the kitchen and returned with a small paper bag. I want you to take this, she said, handing it to Mike. It's banana bread I baked yesterday. Far better than anything you'll get at that meeting. Mike looked up, surprised and touched by the gesture. You don't have to. I want to, Eleanor interrupted. It's not every day an old woman gets rescued by a heavyweight champion. Mike finished his inscription and closed the album, setting the pen aside. He stood up, towering in the small living room, and accepted the banana bread with a nod of thanks. About what happened today, he said seriously. Those officers were out of line. If you change your mind about wanting to do something about it, Eleanor shook her head firmly. What I want is to forget it happened and enjoy the fact that I got to have Mike Tyson in my living room. That's a much better story to tell at bingo night. Mike smiled, but his expression remained concerned. At least let me give you my number, in case you need anything. Eleanor considered this, then nodded. That's very kind, though I can't imagine what an old woman like me would have to offer someone like you. Mike pulled out a business card and wrote his personal cell number on the back. Sometimes the most valuable things aren't obvious right away, he said, handing her the card. like a stranger stepping in when you need help the most. Eleanor accepted the card, tucking it carefully into her dress pocket. "Well, Mr. Tyson, it seems we've had quite an afternoon." "Mike," he corrected gently. "And yes, we have." As he prepared to leave, Eleanor walked him to the door. In the hallway, he turned back to her. "Will you be all right? Those groceries won't last long. And your ice cream." "I'll manage," Eleanor assured him. "I always do." Mike nodded, respecting her resilience. "It was an honor meeting you, Eleanor." "Likewise," she replied with dignity. "And thank you, not just for the help, but for seeing me, really seeing me." As Mike headed down the stairs, banana bread in hand and deep in thought, he couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter had changed something in him. The meeting he was heading to suddenly felt more important, more personal. Because today, he'd been reminded of what it really meant to fight for someone who couldn't fight for themselves. Mike arrived at the downtown community center 15 minutes late for his meeting. The banana bread Eleanor had given him was carefully wrapped in its paper bag, tucked under his arm as he pushed through the glass doors. The center was a renovated warehouse with exposed brick walls and high ceilings, now filled with after-school activities and community programs. "Mr. Tyson, we were getting worried," called out Darlene Phillips, the program director for the Las Vegas Youth Boxing Initiative. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and the energetic presence of someone who'd spent decades working with children. "Sorry I'm late," Mike said, his mind still lingering on his encounter with Eleanor. "Something came up." "Well, you're here now," Darlene said briskly, gesturing toward a conference room where several people were visible through the glass walls. "The board members are eager to hear your thoughts on the program." Mike nodded, following her toward the meeting. As they walked, he noticed a group of teenagers in the center's main area, gathered around punching bags under the supervision of a coach. Their faces lit up when they spotted Mike, though they remained at their stations, clearly having been warned not to mob the famous visitor. "Those are some of the kids who would benefit from the expanded program," Darlene explained. "If we can secure the funding." Mike watched the young boxers for a moment. A skinny boy with glasses was struggling with his technique, his punches landing awkwardly despite his obvious determination. Something about the boy's persistence despite his difficulty reminded Mike of Eleanor's quiet dignity. "We should make sure the program includes elderly outreach too," Mike said unexpectedly. Darlene looked at him in surprise. "Elderly outreach? That wasn't in our original proposal." "It should be," Mike replied firmly. "Boxing isn't just about fighting. It's about respect, discipline, and standing up for those who need it. The kids should learn that part too." Darlene's expression turned thoughtful. "Interesting idea. But how would that work exactly?" Mike was about to respond when his phone buzzed. Glancing at the screen, he saw a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Tyson, this is Officer Diane Wong from earlier today. There's been a development regarding Mrs. Jenkins. Could you call me when you have a moment? It's important." Mike frowned, concern immediately washing over him. "I need to take this," he told Darlene. "Can you give the board my apologies?" "I'll be there in 5 minutes." Stepping away to a quieter corner of the center, Mike called the number. "Officer Wong," came the professional voice on the other end. "This is Mike Tyson. What's happened with Eleanor?" Mike asked directly. There was a slight pause. "Mrs. Jenkins filed a report about the incident," Officer Wong explained. "And there's more. Videos of the confrontation have gone viral. The department is facing significant backlash and the chief wants to address it proactively." Mike's grip tightened on his phone. "I thought Eleanor didn't want to pursue anything." "She didn't initially," Officer Wong replied. "But apparently she received some calls from her family after they saw the videos online. Her grandson is an attorney in Phoenix and he convinced her that what happened was unacceptable." Mike thought about the red marks he'd seen on Eleanor's arm and his jaw clenched. "What happens now?" "The department is conducting an internal review," Officer Wong said. "Officer Bell has been temporarily assigned to desk duty. The chief would like to meet with Mrs. Jenkins to formally apologize and—" She hesitated. "They were hoping you might be willing to be part of that conversation." Mike hadn't expected this. "Why me? Your intervention changed everything," Officer Wong explained. "Without you, this might have escalated further or been dismissed entirely. Plus, your presence would show good faith on all sides. The chief is serious about making this right." Mike considered this, walking slowly past a wall covered with children's artwork. Crayon drawings showed stick figures boxing, dreaming, reaching for stars. The community center represented hope and opportunity for these kids, things that required trust in institutions like the police. "I need to talk to Eleanor first," Mike said finally. "This should be her decision, not mine." "I understand," Officer Wong replied. "Please let us know what she says." After ending the call, Mike stood there for a moment, weighing his next move. The board meeting was waiting, but this felt more pressing. He dialed Eleanor's number, which she had given him before he left her apartment. "Hello?" came her voice, slightly uncertain. "Eleanor, it's Mike Tyson. I just got a call from Officer Wong." "Oh," Eleanor said softly. "Yes, I suppose you would have. Things have gotten rather complicated since you left." Mike could hear the tension in her voice. "Are you okay?" There was a pause. "My grandson Philip called. He saw the video online. It's everywhere, apparently. He was furious about how I was treated. He insisted I file a report." "And how do you feel about that?" Mike asked. Eleanor sighed. "I'm not sure. I told you I didn't want more conflict, but Philip made some good points. He said if I let this go, it could happen to someone else. Someone without a Mike Tyson to step in." Mike smiled slightly at that. "Your grandson sounds smart." "Too smart sometimes," Eleanor said with a hint of pride in her voice. "He's coming to town tomorrow. Wants to meet with the police chief himself. Officer Wong mentioned the chief wants to apologize to you in person," Mike told her. "They asked if I would be there too. Would you?" Eleanor asked, her voice suddenly hopeful. "It would make me feel better having a friendly face there. This is all becoming bigger than I expected." Mike glanced toward the conference room where the board members were still waiting. His commitment to this youth program mattered, but so did seeing things through with Eleanor. "Of course I'll be there," Mike assured her. "Just tell me when and where." After arranging to meet Eleanor the following morning at the police station, Mike rejoined Darlene, who was waiting patiently outside the conference room. "Everything okay?" she asked. Mike nodded slowly. "Yeah, but I've been thinking. Can we bring the kids into the meeting? I want them to hear this directly." Darlene looked surprised but intrigued. "Hear what?" "Why this program matters," Mike said simply. Inside the conference room, the board members, mostly local business owners and community leaders, looked up expectantly as Mike entered, followed by Darlene and, to their surprise, 6 teenagers from the boxing program. "Sorry for the delay," Mike said, taking a seat at the table. The teens hung back nervously against the wall, unsure why they had been invited into this adult space. "Mr. Tyson has some thoughts about the program he'd like to share," Darlene explained to the board members, who nodded, clearly eager to hear from the boxing legend. Mike looked at the teens, then at the adults around the table. "I had something happen today that changed how I see this program," he began. "I met an elderly woman named Eleanor who was being roughly handled by police officers over a misunderstanding." The room fell silent as Mike recounted the incident, how he'd intervened, walked Eleanor home, and learned about her life. As he spoke, the teens along the wall exchanged glances, clearly surprised by this unexpected story. "The point is," Mike continued, "boxing taught me power, but it took me years to understand the responsibility that comes with it." He turned to face the teenagers directly. "When you learn to fight, you're not learning it to bully others or show off. You're learning it so you can stand up for yourself and for people who can't stand up for themselves." A girl with braided hair raised her hand hesitantly. "Like that old lady?" Mike nodded. "Exactly like Eleanor. She couldn't defend herself against those officers. She needed someone in her corner." "So what are you proposing, Mr. Tyson?" asked one of the board members, a heavy-set man in a business suit. Mike turned back to the table. "I want this program to include community service. These kids should visit senior centers, help elderly residents with groceries, shovel snow in winter, whatever needs doing. They need to understand that their strength comes with a duty to protect, not intimidate." The board members exchanged impressed looks. This was clearly not what they had expected from the former heavyweight champion. "I think that's a wonderful idea," said an older woman at the far end of the table. "It would help change the perception of boxing as just a violent sport." The skinny boy with glasses whom Mike had noticed earlier spoke up. "But what about our training time? We need to practice if we want to get better." Mike smiled at the boy. "What's your name, kid?" "Luis," the boy replied nervously. Luis, helping others will make you a better boxer than hitting a bag ever could, Mike said. It'll teach you why we fight in the first place. Luis considered this, then nodded slowly. I have a meeting at the police station tomorrow, Mike continued, addressing the whole room. With Eleanor and the police chief. If it's all right with all of you, I'd like to bring a proposal for cooperation between this program and the police department. Darlene leaned forward, clearly intrigued. What kind of cooperation? Community policing workshops. Having officers train alongside these kids sometimes. Building relationships instead of barriers, Mike explained. What happened to Eleanor shows what happens when police see community members as potential threats instead of people they're sworn to protect. The board members began nodding, the energy in the room shifting from polite interest to genuine enthusiasm. One of them, a woman with a legal pad in front of her, was taking rapid notes. Mr. Tyson, she said, looking up from her writing, would you be willing to be the official spokesperson for this expanded vision of the program? Your name and story would give it significant credibility. Mike thought about Eleanor's scrapbook of newspaper clippings, about the red marks on her arm, about the dignity with which she'd handled the entire situation. Then he thought about these kids learning to use their strength for something bigger than themselves. Yes, he said with conviction. I'm all in. As the meeting continued, developing the expanded vision for the program, Mike felt a sense of purpose he hadn't expected when he'd first agreed to this charity appearance. What had begun as a simple endorsement had transformed into something much more meaningful, all because he'd stopped to help an elderly woman on the street. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important fights happened outside the ring. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department headquarters stood imposing against the morning sky, its modern glass and steel structure reflecting the bright desert sun. Inside the spacious lobby, Eleanor Jenkins sat straight-backed on a bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a powder blue dress with a small pearl brooch, her special occasions outfit, saved for church services and important appointments. Beside her sat her grandson Philip, a serious-looking man in his 30s with Eleanor's same determined chin. He checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes, a leather briefcase resting against his leg. Are you sure you're up for this, Grandma? He asked, his voice gentle but concerned. We could postpone if you're feeling tired. Eleanor shook her head firmly. I'm fine, Philip. And Mr. Tyson said he would be here. We won't be alone. As if summoned by her words, the glass doors at the entrance slid open and Mike Tyson walked in. He was dressed more formally today in dark slacks and a crisp button-down shirt. What surprised Eleanor, though, was that he wasn't alone. Behind him came 6 teenagers wearing matching gray t-shirts with Las Vegas Youth Boxing printed across the front. Mike spotted Eleanor and walked over, the teens following somewhat awkwardly behind him. Good morning, Eleanor, he said warmly, bending slightly to take her outstretched hand. Sorry if we're running a bit late. Not at all, Eleanor replied, smiling up at him. You're right on time. She glanced curiously at the teenagers hovering behind Mike. Oh, Mike said, following her gaze. Hope you don't mind. These are some kids from the boxing program I was telling you about. I thought it might be good for them to see this. Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. The more the merrier, I suppose. Philip stood and extended his hand to Mike. Philip Jenkins, Eleanor's grandson. Thank you for helping my grandmother yesterday, Mr. Tyson. Our family is deeply grateful. Mike shook his hand firmly. Just did what anyone should have done. Unfortunately, not everyone would have, Philip replied, his tone carrying the edge of someone who had spent the night watching viral videos of his grandmother being manhandled by police. Before the conversation could continue, Officer Diane Wong appeared from a corridor, now dressed in a more formal uniform than she had worn the day before. Mrs. Jenkins. Mr. Tyson, she greeted them professionally. Thank you for coming. Chief Harrigan is ready to see you now. She paused, noticing the teenagers. All of you? Mike nodded firmly. They're with me. Part of a community outreach program. Officer Wong seemed about to object, then thought better of it. Very well. Please follow me. The unusual group made their way through the building to a large conference room. Chief Robert Harrigan, a broad-shouldered man with silver hair and 30 years of police work behind him, stood as they entered. Beside him sat Officer Bell, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his dress uniform. Mrs. Jenkins, Chief Harrigan said, coming around the table to greet her. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Mr. Tyson, thank you for coming as well. He glanced questioningly at the teenagers but made no comment about their presence. Everyone took seats around the large table, the teens bunching together at the far end, trying to look serious and professional despite their youth. I want to begin by saying how deeply sorry I am for what happened yesterday, Chief Harrigan started, looking directly at Eleanor. The treatment you received was not in accordance with our department's values or training. Eleanor nodded slightly but said nothing, her expression composed. I've reviewed the body cam footage as well as civilian videos of the incident, the chief continued. Officer Bell's actions were disproportionate to the situation, and for that the department takes full responsibility. Philip leaned forward. My grandmother is 78 years old. She was carrying groceries, not weapons. The use of force was completely unjustified. Chief Harrigan nodded soberly. You're absolutely right. There's no excuse for what happened. Officer Bell shifted in his seat, his face flushed with embarrassment and regret. Mrs. Jenkins, he said, his voice strained. I want to apologize personally for my actions yesterday. I misinterpreted the situation and reacted inappropriately. There's no excuse for that. Eleanor studied the young officer's face for a long moment. You hurt me, she said simply. Not just my arm, though that's still bruised. You hurt my dignity. Officer Bell swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. I know that now. What concrete steps is the department taking to ensure this doesn't happen again? Philip asked, his lawyer instincts taking over. Beyond apologies and desk duty, Chief Harrigan opened a folder in front of him. We're implementing several measures immediately. Officer Bell will undergo additional training in de-escalation techniques and appropriate use of force, particularly when dealing with elderly citizens. Additionally, we're revising our protocols for approaching potential witnesses versus suspects. Mike had been silent until now, watching the exchange carefully. That's a start, he said, but it doesn't address the bigger issue. All eyes turned to him. And what issue is that, Mr. Tyson? Chief Harrigan asked. The disconnect between your officers and the community they're supposed to protect, Mike replied. Training is good, but what about relationship building? One of the teenagers at the end of the table, Luis, the skinny boy with glasses from the community center, raised his hand tentatively. Chief Harrigan looked surprised but nodded for him to speak. Sir, Luis began, his voice cracking slightly with nervousness. In our boxing program, the first thing we learn is respect. Before we even put on gloves. Maybe police officers should train with us sometimes, so we can learn from each other? A surprised silence followed his suggestion. That's actually an interesting idea, Chief Harrigan said, looking thoughtful. Mike smiled at Luis with approval before turning back to the chief. These kids are learning discipline, respect, and how to use their strength responsibly. Your officers could share their knowledge while building relationships with the community's youth. Break down those barriers, Officer Wong nodded slowly. It could be part of our community policing initiative. And what about the elderly community? Eleanor spoke up, her voice stronger now. Young officers like Bell here clearly have little experience interacting with seniors. Perhaps some community service hours at senior centers would be beneficial? Chief Harrigan looked from Eleanor to Mike to the teenagers, clearly seeing the potential for something meaningful. We could create a comprehensive program. Officers would participate in youth activities like the boxing program while also serving senior communities. And we could call it Bridging the Gap. Another of the teenagers suggested eagerly. I like that, Eleanor said with an approving nod to the girl. Philip, who had been taking notes, looked up. This is all very promising, but what about my grandmother's specific case? There should be some form of accountability. Chief Harrigan nodded gravely. Officer Bell will face disciplinary action according to department procedures. Additionally, the department would like to offer Mrs. Jenkins compensation for the distress caused. I don't want money, Eleanor said firmly, surprising her grandson. What I want is change. Real change. Mike leaned forward. What if Officer Bell becomes the first participant in this new program? Working directly with both the Youth Boxing Initiative and Senior Community Services? Officer Bell straightened in his chair. I would be willing to do that, sir. More than willing. Eleanor studied the young officer thoughtfully. Under supervision, of course. Of course, Chief Harrigan agreed quickly. And with regular reports on his progress, Philip added. I could help oversee the boxing portion, Mike offered. Make sure it's having the intended effect. As the details were discussed, the mood in the room gradually shifted from tense confrontation to collaborative problem-solving. The teenagers began contributing ideas about how police officers could connect with young people, while Eleanor shared insights about the needs of seniors who often felt vulnerable and overlooked. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, a framework had been established for the Bridging the Gap program, with commitments from the police department, the Youth Boxing Initiative, and several senior community representatives whom Eleanor had volunteered to contact. As they prepared to leave, Chief Harrigan shook hands with each person, ending with Eleanor. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said sincerely, "what happened to you was inexcusable, but your response, turning this negative experience into a positive community initiative, is remarkable." Eleanor smiled slightly. "At my age, young man, you learn that holding on to anger only hurts yourself. Better to build something good instead." Outside in the bright sunlight, the group paused on the steps of the police building. News vans had gathered, alerted by the viral nature of the original incident and curious about the meeting's outcome. "They'll want a statement," Philip warned, eyeing the reporters setting up cameras. Eleanor smoothed her dress and straightened her brooch. "Well, we have something worth telling them, don't we?" Mike stood beside her, the teenagers flanking them like an honor guard. "You sure you're up for this? The media can be intense." Eleanor looked up at him with a twinkle in her eye. "I think between the two of us we can handle it. After all, you're the heavyweight champion, and I'm just a tough old lady who wouldn't stay down for the count." Mike laughed, a genuine, warm sound that drew the attention of the reporters. As the cameras turned toward them and microphones were extended, Eleanor stood tall beside Mike Tyson, ready to tell the world how an unfortunate incident had transformed into an opportunity for healing and connection across the divides of age, authority, and community. Behind them, Officer Bell watched from the doorway of the police station, his expression thoughtful as he witnessed the beginning of what would become his path to redemption. And somewhere in the crowd of observers, a child asked her mother who the old lady with Mike Tyson was. "That," the mother replied, "is someone who just changed our city for the better." 3 months later, the Las Vegas Bridging the Gap program had expanded to 12 police precincts across the city. Officer Bell, still under supervision but making excellent progress, led a weekly boxing class for seniors focused on balance and gentle self-defense. Eleanor attended faithfully, often bringing her famous banana bread. Mike Tyson returned monthly to check on the program's progress, always making time to visit Eleanor's apartment for iced tea and updates on her growing collection of newspaper clippings, now featuring stories about the very program that had emerged from their chance encounter. The viral video that had captured their first meeting continued to circulate online, but now it was accompanied by a follow-up story of transformation, proving that sometimes the most powerful punches aren't thrown with fists, but with compassion, dignity, and the courage to build bridges where walls once stood.